Chris Banks is my name. I'm a sergeant in the Lorne Scots, and I joined February 20th, 2000. My grandfather used to tell me a lot of stories about his service in Egypt during World War II, and my other grandfather told me stories of his service with the dragoons in Europe in World War II, and I kind of wanted to emulate them a little bit. At the same time, being in the Army is a challenge. It's one of the hardest careers out there, so I wanted to see if I could do it. My parents are always telling me how proud they are of what I've done for the country, what I've done for other people. To my wife, I believe she has a love-hate relationship with the Army. It takes up a lot of my time. Like, I'm very dedicated. There's a lot of my day-to-day that goes into being in the Army, but at the same time, she's also very proud of everything that I've accomplished and everything that I do in the Army. I remember when I was an Army cadet 20 years ago, I knew, but I didn't really understand what Remembrance Day was all about. I would think about, people who I didn't know and the sacrifices they made. I would think about my grandparents who thankfully both came home, but I would think about them, but I didn't really understand. And when I was 21, I went to Bosnia, and then I came back and I had a little bit more of an understanding of what it means. Like, Bosnia wasn't, what Afghanistan was. When I got back from Afghanistan, Remembrance Day was really hard for me. For like a long time after I got back, Remembrance Day was really hard for me. Because all I could think about is, people I actually knew. That's what changed, was I knew some of the guys who didn't come home. And that had been like a big change in the way I see Remembrance Day now. Is, there's not just names anymore, but it's also, people. I mean, like, all the names were always people, but they weren't people that I knew. Now they're people I know. And, there's a lot of families out there that probably means the same thing to. I don't know, I put a lot of thought into how I would explain everything that happened to my daughter and any other kids I have one day. I don't know, I want to tell her the truth, but I don't want to tell her too much. There's stories from Afghanistan that I haven't even told my parents. There's stuff from Afghanistan I haven't even told my wife. I haven't told everything to almost anybody. Like, people who know me know bits and pieces, and if you add them all up, you might have a room full of people who know the whole story. But, things like combat, I don't talk about combat with my family. I talk about combat when I'm at the armories and I'm talking to fellow soldiers. As one of the older guys, I'm trying to pass on some knowledge, some experience to them. But most of my family doesn't know exactly what happened over there. So how I would tell my kids, I would tell them why we were there and why it was important and what it meant for me to be there and what it meant for those who gave everything. I'll be honest with you, I came home and I crawled into a bottle and I stayed there for about 18 months. I mean, it was hard to sleep over there, but you were exhausted, so you did. And then I came home and it was too quiet. I was always on edge, expecting something to happen. And it was just like a state of being. And that happens to, I think, everyone who was over there. And when I came home, I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't deal with not being on patrol. I couldn't, so it was hard. So to kind of calm my heart rate down and try and fall asleep, I would just crawl into a bottle, and I stayed there. It was hard just to interact with people, because I hadn't interacted with people in 7 months. Like, we talked to people, we were friendly, we waved at people. We weren't really expecting, some guy to turn around after waving at us and, fire a couple rounds off or detonate a vest. But came home from Afghanistan, and I remember one of the first things I did was I had an outdated flip phone from before I went. So I went to the Brampton City Center, and it was crowded. I remember I bumped shoulders with someone, like not even hard, just, like the kind of bumping shoulders that happens to everybody when you go to a crowded place. And like, I wasn't used to people that I didn't know intimately being that close to me. So I turned around and I gave him this look that I was ready to kill him. In that moment, like I was just, I was ready to go. Coming home was, I don't know, sometimes it felt like it was harder. For the few years I got back, I said, never again, I'm never going over there again. But then I would always have these moments where it's like, I wish I was still there. It's been almost a decade since I've been back, and I still have those moments where it's never again. But I also have those moments, and these moments are more frequent now, moments where I wish I was there. Over there, everything makes sense. Bad guys are bad guys. There's no politics. If they're shooting at you, they're bad guys. Do what you were trained to do. Coming home, nothing's that simple. Kind of the understatement of the century. Bosnia was a challenge. It was the first time I was operational. And for me, when I went there, I had 3 years in the Army, which is incredibly lucky for someone with 3 years in the Army to get selected for an international deployment. It's not like you see in movies and you see on the U.S. news where guys are joined and deploy within their first year. There's no forcing soldiers to go. Like, guys volunteer. It's a competition. People are merited. You don't go because they have a position to fill. You go because you are one of the best selected from your unit to go. So for me to go after 3 years of service, that was amazing. It was new. It was exciting. It was I was learning. I was out on patrols in the mountains in Bosnia, and it was, people weren't shooting at us, but we were operational. And I don't know really how to put that in words that someone who hasn't served would understand, but being operational is one of the better things that you can do with your career. Like, that's the whole purpose of the military, is to serve. Being operational, there's nothing like it. Afghanistan was a different story, though. I remember my first patrol, it was, in the high 60s. Like, I drank like 3 liters out of my camelback. I drank 2 1-liter bottles of water, but I'm still dehydrated. I'm still dying, so I'm stretching my calves, trying to keep from cramping up. Meanwhile, there was a platoon commander from the platoon that we were relieving. So he was on his way home. And he was explaining to us, you hear those people, banging pots and pans, smacking tree branches together? Well, those are the local warning signs. Like, they're warning the Taliban or the insurgents that you guys are coming this way. So that was like eye-opening. Once we got into firefights, that surprisingly wasn't difficult at all. We had been so well trained that all we did was train. So when we got into firefights, like, it clicked in, and we were looking at each other, like, this feels just like training. But then that changed when, casualties started coming in. And that's where difficult really found a new meaning. Remembrance Day, we're not remembering the wars. We don't sit down and honor, the treaties or the wars or the acts that, started wars, or even the acts during wars. In Remembrance Day, we pay tribute to those who signed up. We pay tribute to those who did the acts, not the acts themselves, but those who stepped up and did what needed to be done. The average person is fortunate that they don't live through wars. At least in Canada. They don't live through wars. They don't live through terrorist attack like other parts of the world do. But that's because of, the people who, put the uniform on and they go out there. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to know how many people in their own family put on a uniform, and they're, one of the big reasons why we don't have to worry about, a school bus exploding with our kids on it, or the next country over bombing us because we worship a different god. This is, Remembrance Day is about, remembering those who signed up and essentially wrote a check to say, I'm giving you everything. I'm giving you my life, just so other people can live.